Cool. So why don't we go ahead and get started? My guess is there's probably gonna be a few more people are filtering here over the next little bit, but we'll go ahead and get started here. And like I said, we'd love for this to be interactive. But thank you so much for joining. We here at Domestique, we try and do a webinar once a month, and we kind of aggregate the webinar topics based upon kind of what we're hearing from customers, people, things like that. And so the topic that we're going to chat about today is how to have your data architecture to empower your executives to make data-driven decisions. This is something that getting a ton of questions and things like that. And so the good news for everybody here is you don't have to listen to me. You can listen to somebody vastly more intelligent than myself. So John Queally is a dear friend of ours, and I genuinely think one of the most thoughtful, talented RevOps leaders out there. John, welcome. You want to give kind of a brief intro about your background and who you are as a human being?
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a high praise. High praise that I don't know sure is too well deserved. But no, yeah, so I'm John. I lead our RevOps team here at Clari. And honestly, I got introduced to Domestique a year and a half ago, probably or so, and actually did some work with Domestique before joining Clari. And one of the reasons I'm excited to be here and just excited to be here with Reese and Alex and the team is I get to meet a lot of RevOps people, luckily, and you rarely get to meet some of those RevOps people who are they get it. They get it. This is different. They're trying to build the new wave of what this entire function should be, which really excites me. So just a bit about myself. I live here in Salt Lake City. I'm sitting in my backyard right now because this is what keeps me sane. Is just being outside and surrounded by flowers, ultimately. I am what I like to call a late in life RevOpser. Started my career in consulting, spent 7.5 years for working for large financial institutions, which is really where I cut my data chops, and wanted to go join the big bad world of tech, and fell into RevOps. Happened to get hired on a RevOps team, and I was like, this is really cool. Also, I was shocked, and especially the conversation around today around the data architecture side of the house and how that's important. I got in and I expected tech companies are the ones building all of these tech tools. Of course, they're going to have these really strong data processes and it's going to be aligned to strategy. And I came in and it was like, whoa, that is not the case. And it fascinated me even more. And that's the type of, I say, RevOps leader that I aspire to be, is really sitting on that fulcrum between how do we move the entire business forward from a strategic perspective, but underpin that with true data, and actually govern scalable data processes so we can grow the business. And that's where I spend a good chunk of my time trying to balance between those two, plus all the other things that we all do as RevOps professionals every day. I'm an open book. I am about as transparent can be. So like Reese said, please rip me to shreds on this. Let's have a conversation. That's way more enticing than me just blabbing about stuff with Reese. So excited to be here, and yeah, any questions, I'm all for it.
And fun fact for everybody, John has a 1,500-pound grill in his backyard that he recently acquired.
The Traeger is life. So I would say, and having a friend who works at Traeger was even better because we got an incredible deal on a very large grill that I think can cook 12 chickens at once, which is insane. Highly recommend.
So anyways, the next time we do this webinar, we're going to be at John's place and he'll cook for all of us. So cool. Well, let's jump into it. This is kind of our agenda. Well, we'll get into it, but we're going to talk through go-to-market strategy, process, data architecture, AI, and align across the org. The reason why we're talking about strategy, process, and architecture is typically the reason why there's issues in trusting your data. So we're going to dive into kind of all this stuff about why, but we're going to jump into this. So this is very interesting. It was crazy. It's John and I started talking about this about a month ago, and Clari ran this report internally, and I want John to talk about that. But I also was at a conference here recently, and I heard almost the exact same stat from Forrester or Gartner, one of two, I'm forgetting now. But essentially the stat was kind of people don't trust their data, and it's the vast majority of people. So, John, you want to give a little overview about kind of like the Clari report that you ran and some of the findings in it?
Yep. So we've got a subsection at Clari called Clari Labs that does research at the end of the day on the industry. And they researched senior executives across tech companies primarily, senior revenue executives across tech companies primarily. And just for context, as an industry overall, we spent $13.8 billion in 2024 on AI solutions. Massive amount of money, but are finding that 67% of revenue leaders don't trust their data.
Which is mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. Like the vast majority of leaders don't trust the data.
And so like my question to the bag is, if you don't trust the data, how are you trusting AI that's fed by that data you don't trust to come and change your business? It just doesn't fundamentally make sense. And literally, like our head of enterprise, Elizabeth Temples, was on a plane going to Gartner last week and was laughing on the plane because she was sitting next to another sales leader who was, I think, probably screaming at their RevOps person around like, you can go pull the numbers, I'm not going to trust them. And so there's this vast amount of mistrust. And like, this is a neighborhood in Utah. I live in Utah, and it's like the perfect analogy I can think of is really nice neighborhood, $800,000 to $1.5 million homes around in this neighborhood. And this is a literal event last year. This is actually not AI generated. This is a literal event where there used to be a home in that spot. And the entire foundation gave way on the side of the hill. And 2 days before this family was supposed to move in, there's a video, you can see it collapsing off the hill down into the ravine, and bye-bye home. Like, it's, to me, it's the perfect analogy of, we are not magicians, but how can we deploy AI tools on top of bad data or not trusted data? This is the end result. And the industry overall is spending a ton of money. We've got to change that, because if anything, over the past week in particular at Gartner, like AI was everywhere, absolutely everywhere. Every single conversation, to the point where attendees at the end of the first day were like, I get it. Like, everyone's talking about the same thing, which is good, but like, we've got to address this. And the one biggest change that I took away from that conference was Dan Gottlieb, who's one of the lead Gartner analysts, got up in the first session, and there were about 1,200 CROs, CCOs, senior level revenue leaders sitting in this audience, and literally said, if you think AI is not your job, and that's IT's job, you are wrong. It is your job. If you think that data quality is not your job and it's someone else's job, you are wrong. You must lean into these conversations. And to me, that's the biggest shift that I've been hearing, just sort of an industry overall, is that it's there, like this unsexy conversation about data quality and what feeds our AI is being put front and center, because people invested $13.8 billion, and a staggering amount of those individuals are saying we're not getting return on those investments. It's something like 56% based on that study. So we're in this conundrum, and we have the power to change this, and that's what we need to take advantage of.
Bill, you got a question? I love it.
Yeah, so you want interactive. I'm happy to be interactive.
Love it. You have no idea how
data quality, obviously huge impact, and we're now getting rid of our wonderful consultant who has been with us for 9 months, and hiring a RevOps person, because the data quality has become atrocious, and almost everything that we do I have to redo in a spreadsheet, which takes a lot of my time.
Yep.
And I can't directionally, the dashboards are accurate, but in terms of actual numbers, they're not that accurate all the time. And I'm wondering how much of this has to do with the actual data, and how much of this has to do with the person who is the RevOps function not being aligned with exactly what it is that the business wants to see. And so, like, I'll get a dashboard that looks very beautiful and says something and is accurate for whatever the RevOps person thought I wanted, but isn't it all what I wanted? So I'm curious about the balance of that and how you would address that.
Yeah, so great question. This is going to get into a bunch of things we're going to talk to, but I definitely want to kind of hit on this. So I would have a comment, and then John would love to hear your comment. First comment I would have is like, oftentimes when you don't trust the data, it's a misalignment about understanding what you're trying to measure. And when you say what we're trying to measure, I would argue it's across the org, not just what Bill wants to measure, but it's like, what does the company want to measure, and making sure that RevOps is that connective tissue. And then the second reason why it's often up, and when you're talking about what you want to measure, you want to align that to kind of like the key goals and stuff you can make decisions around. Having data that you're not making decisions around doesn't matter. And the second thing is like making sure we have the infrastructure so that the data that is showing for those key goals is actually accurate. And we're going to get into but John, what would you add to that? Agree, disagree? How would you think about that?
Completely agree. I think completely agree, and 100% agree on that alignment. And I mean, Bill, I think it's probably a little bit of both, to be completely honest. Are you capturing the right things, and is that aligned to what you're actually trying to achieve? And I think the biggest thing, and we'll talk about this in a bit too, is revenue data doesn't just sit in one place. If your CRM is your only place that you're going for insights, it is a siloed view of the world. Especially like our job as a RevOps professional is, I do not have allegiance to any one particular revenue team. Marketing, sales, CS, no. I have allegiance to the company. And I've got to look at that at a corporate level that takes into account things from every single one of those departments and rolls it up to a company view. That's, I think, the missing link a lot of times is, yes, in that silo, that is correct. But in the context of the business, you're missing out on all the nuance. And that's what needs to shift.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point about where this person actually reports to. Because if it's reporting to sales, then it becomes sales ops. If it's reporting to marketing, it becomes marketing ops. We're having this report to the CRO, who's responsible for all the revenue and is a peer of the finance team. And then eventually, I assume that this person will have equal responsibility for helping the finance team as helping all the rest, because that's where all the projections and stuff end up, and that data has to sync across with the CRO's data.
Could not agree with you more, Bill. And at some point, if this person grows in their role, you may want to actually think about giving them a seat at the table. So I think in a perfect world, that's where they should sit, but I think how you have it structured is a good kind of V1. All right.
And
in classic Reese fashion, I'm sure Alex is laughing already. We're behind, but keep the questions coming. So, John, you want to kind of give the so what on the slide?
Yeah, Bill, to that exact thing. Like my goal as RevOps is to deliver the right signal to the right team at the right moment, based on that comprehensive data. Like that is what this is all about. And if we're not doing that, and we're doing other stuff, it's probably not going to matter. So like, that's a reframing, especially when it comes to that data architecture. We've got to put this in mind: is, are we delivering that? If not, we're wasting our time and wasting our resources. So like, that's our mission at Clari, is that is what we strive to do. And that's where our entire journey is going. Because this is the function we have to play as ops teams.
Cool. So what's interesting is this is a great segue, and Bill, I love the fact you're bringing this up, into strategy, right? Because as you think about, John's alluding to, hey, 6-7% of people don't trust the data. The vast majority of the reason, this probably here at Don't Mistake is probably 40, 50, 60% of our engagements of like, we start off with some version of this question. The reason why usually the data is not aligned, Bill, to exactly your point, is this slide right here. So this is how we think about RevOps. John, I know, is very aligned to this. It's across the entire customer journey, inclusive of product, right? So I know you're having RevOps report to that CRO. The thing that's missing in that, Bill, is they need to be inclusive of product, right? Because product's rolling out a new thing that's going to impact the enterprise team, and all of a sudden they're going to be late. How does that change? How are you thinking about adding enterprise, accounts? Things that it's got to be across that customer journey. And then it's strategy, process, tools, data, enablement in that order. And the reason why this is important for being able to trust your data is like, if you don't have the strategy, the process, or the tool set up well, the data is not going to matter. So an example of this, right, is in classic things like, let's say you're misaligned on like what your MQL data is. Well, the way that we would argue it is, as you think about strategy, have you clearly identified your ICP? Who are all the accounts? What's the firmographic? Do you have that documented and codified into your system? On the process side, do you have life cycle stages? And life cycle stages, for everybody who doesn't know, is like it's your customer journey backbone. But oftentimes what you'll see in a life cycle stage is maybe an MQL is only triggered if it's an ICP and they do something, right? Download a white paper, demo request, things like that. Then is that life cycle stages codified into your tech stack? And it's usually your marketing automation platform and your CRM. And then on the data side, do you have a report that's a single source of truth reporting around MQLs? So if you don't have those 4 things set up, oftentimes it's really easy to come in a meeting. John's got one definition of MQL, I have a different, and then we're going to spend 30 minutes talking about whose definition of an MQL is correct. John, you're another RevOps professional. What do you like, dislike, agree, disagree?
I agree completely. And I think especially with earlier stage companies as well, this applies just as much to later stage companies, but I hear it more from earlier stage companies, which is, well, marketing's doing all this stuff and it's generating these MQLs. I'm like, well, how do you know if that's successful? Are those actually hitting what you intended to do? I think that's, to me, is like having the intention is almost more important than the activity to a certain extent, because you're investing all this money. Are you hitting where you want to hit and progressing that through the funnel? We've got to do that definition up front. And that's not to say that that definition is set in stone, but if we don't have that in place, we don't know if we need to adjust it. We don't know if what we're doing is working or if we're just shooting in from a shotgun approach in the dark. And it is so hard. Pipeline generation is so difficult right now just across the industry overall. It's probably the number one issue that all of our clients are talking about, is how to do that effectively. We've got to set the strategy and the goals and align everything to that and then shift it when we need to. So I cannot stress it enough of just that is so important to define it and go in with that intention.
In one note to exactly what John just said, if the strategy is living in an executive's head, doesn't exist. It's got to be documented, and that 27-year-old AE, 23-year-old BDR needs to understand what it is. So, all right. The reason why we're showing this slide, right, is we think internally of RevOps in kind of this maturity. And as you think about being able to trust the data, part of that maturity is kind of this crawl, walk, run, right? So when we think of a RevOps maturity, right, this is independent of company maturity. We think of 3 buckets: build, grow, and scale. But build is this kind of infrastructure work, similar to what John was talking about. Do you have life cycle stages? Do you have your go-to-market strategy document? And that can answer like very basic things like what happened? How many MQLs did we do last month? Grow is a little bit kind of like more infrastructure, right? Do we have attribution set in place? Things like that to be able to answer why did it happen? All right, we drove 100 MQLs last month. What were the channels that drove it? Like what were the investments that drove it? And then scale's the kind of holy grail here, right? You got all this kind of infrastructure in place. You can start to look in the future, say what will happen and how do I make it happen? All right, we got $100,000 left in our marketing budget for the year. Where should we be investing in? How many MQLs do we think we have? And what is the conversion of those MQLs and all that type of stuff? John, as you've kind of like seen this, whether it's at Clari, RevOps roles, where do you see most organizations? How do you see this kind of the crawl, walk, run of being able to trust the data?
And organizations, depending on their size, does not mean they are, especially as the maturity of a RevOps function, does not mean they're at the far right of this chart. I think we are with RevOps leadership in particular, it really depends on that individual of where they are falling on this chart. Are they actually being your strategic partner? If they are your strategic partner, they're going to help you go through those stages to get to the right. If they are an admin turned leader that is thinking very holistically about the tooling and the systems, but not actually the corporate strategy, you're going to be on the left-hand side no matter what happens. And so to me, it is that getting that right person in place to be able to sit on both sides of those camps and help you move the business forward is the most important thing, and the most important thing that any RevOps leader needs to strive to do.
Could not agree more. So Bill, as you're thinking about hiring that RevOps leader, and by the way, if you have a JD, send it to us. We'll post it in our networks. As you're thinking about hiring that leader, think about, all right, what's the crawl, walk, run of the data that you can think about, the build, grow, scale of the data that you can start to kind of trust. So you can, because this isn't going to happen overnight. And I think that's one of the classic mistakes is everybody wants to be in the scale, but the dirty little secret is most people are still in the build and the grow. All right, this is just a quick slide. So we've talked about strategy, process, tools, data enablement. What this slide is this is a go-to-market strategy documented on one slide. Typically what we see with organizations is they'll document it and then there'll be several slides behind this, right? So you can see here, left-hand side is your kind of customer journey. This is your funnel in the middle, on the left, hey, we're using our revenue methodology as command to message. On our right-hand side, we're using MEDPIC internally to kind of like review things. On the very right side, they're using an ABM model. Then the two lines below it is that's your kind of like operating cadence or what's your meeting structure. So this is an example of, there's nothing prescriptive around this, but as you're thinking about documenting your go-to-market strategy, what I would strongly recommend, and we'll send out the slide, you want to steal it, feel free to steal it, we don't care. There should be some sort of kind of 60,000 foot view and then key slides behind it. So as you think about your ICP, there should be a slide behind it that says our ICP, our accounts that have this firmographic data and this type of stuff, right? All right, when we talk about MEDPIC, this is how we use MEDPIC. Inbound and outbound SLAs, right? Inbound leads that are tier ones need to be addressed within, an hour, and tier twos need to be addressed. Like all of that stuff should be documented. And typically what you see is like a, whatever it is, 20, 30 slide deck that, you take then the BDR, sales teams, CS teams through kind of an onboarding to help kind of get that into the DNA. John, like when you've seen this documented and worked well, like what are some other kind of tips and tricks, for teams as they're trying to kind of operationalize their go-to-market strategy?
I think the biggest thing is alignment at the leadership level. A lot of this requires, and we'll talk about this in the processes come a second, this getting into these motions requires alignment and commitment at the leadership level, at the executive level. This is not a bottoms up thing, in my opinion. Like it can sort of happen, but then everyone's kind of doing their own thing. How you run that business, how you run the rigor and the cadences behind the business is what actually enables you to change and push the direction of the company towards what you're trying to achieve from a strategic perspective. So if there is not alignment at the top, like that is number one, where you've got to be committed on, we are going to run the organism this way.
And we're actually going to talk about different ways that you can actually start to drive that alignment here coming up. And we're going to specifically talk about it from an operating cadence, which is kind of this green bar here. But this is just an example of it. So that's kind of the strategy piece, like understanding, where you're at in kind of your RevOps maturity. If you don't have your go-to-market strategy documented, you should definitely document it. Now we're dumping down in the process. And where we're going to focus on the process side is your operating cadence. So what an operating cadence is, this is your meeting structure. One of the things we recommend to all clients is like on a quarterly basis, if you're not taking a look at your meeting structure, you should look at this across all your go-to-market teams, not just sales, because time is the most valuable asset, right? If you think about what RevOps is trying to do, is we want to give more time back to BDRs to make outbound phone calls and or discovery calls, right? We want to give time to AEs to sell more. We want to give times to CSMs to spend more times with customers, things like that. You should be reviewing your operating cadence and essentially who's in the meeting, what is the objective of the meeting? Is there a clear agenda? Is there data? You should have reports linked into every meeting, and what is the prep required? If you don't have a clear understanding of it, you can probably get rid of that meeting, right? So this is an example of a 60,000 foot view of some of the key meetings that are happening on an annual basis. And the reason why this is important, right, is you think about it, and Bill, I'm not trying to pick on you. You just asked a bunch of questions earlier, which I very much appreciate, is like your RevOps person is about to come in, right? Well, if I was working, in your organization, what I really want to understand is like, oh shoot, when's the next board meeting? Because if I'm a betting man, I bet the data that I have to present, and I want to make sure that that's the same data that we're managing the business on, I had that ready to go a month beforehand, ready to go. Oh, product planning, right? Am I empowering the product team with product release and information to be able to kind of like help them plan so that they're not just planning based upon kind of whatever the product managers want to do, but they're actually getting data from the customers and the sales teams, right? We're going to talk about some specific meetings in here, but this is how you drive the alignment, right? You think about that strategy, right? What this is this is the key kind of points along your year based upon that strategy, and how is RevOps supporting this via data? So John, I know there's a meeting that's near and dear to your heart. You want to, like, we talked about operating cadence at the macro level. Walk us through this kind of like forecasting meeting and driving alignment across this at a more micro level.
Yep, and y'all might be thinking like data architecture was in the title of this entire webinar, and we haven't even talked about it yet. And that is actually intentional, because data architecture is to serve this. If you do not have this defined, the data doesn't matter. It's just going to be data for data's sake. The data has to underpin what you are trying to do. So we run our business at Clari, like we're on a quarterly business structure, and we run that off of the 13 weeks of the quarter. And if you think about forecasting meetings that every sales team has, what typically happens at those? Typically, the salesperson will be like, here are the top 2-3 late stage deals that I want to talk about because I feel comfortable talking about them. And they gear the entire conversation in that one-on-one with the manager or the team forecasting call around those late stage deals that they want to focus on because there's comfort there. That's what we've tried to break apart in our what we call our revenue cadences. So every single week of the quarter, there is a different goal for that meeting. Like this is an example, just a pure example, but we're breaking it down into the pipe, into the components of it from a new logo perspective, a renewal perspective, an account health perspective, to give actually full coverage throughout those 13 weeks to everything we need those reps and those frontline managers to be focused on. That doesn't have to be the same thing each week. If it is the same thing each week, you're only gonna get the same results. So how do we decompose that and bring that to life? And for us, we have data elements underpinning each of these individual things in the platform. Some of these things will be at the executive level, the manager level, the rep level. We're flexing that, but we're trying to give full coverage, and everything in here is aligned to what we're trying to achieve as a business. So it was a pretty big, we implemented this at the beginning of last year, and it was a pretty significant shift on how we actually ran the business, and the results have come from it. And Reese, if you hit to the next slide, we flipped as well.
John, two questions. One,
Yeah.
would you quickly explain what EMR is, and the second kind of point I just want to highlight this is like John just made the comment, and I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. Every meeting should have the corresponding reporting into this, right? We're talking about data. This is how you drive that alignment. So you want to tell us what EMR is?
Yep, executive manager and rep. So for each of these methods, we structure this where everyone isn't necessarily on the exact same dashboard. Some of these sit at the executive level, some at the manager level, some at the rep level. And so we're giving the different views relative to that cohort of what they need to see.
Love that. And again, Bill, not picking on you, but this is how you start to drive that consistency across the org, right?
Yep. And for us, like this, every week, Thursday, our frontline leaders are meeting with their entire teams to wrap those specific goals for the week based on that last chart with their teams. Friday, all of our VPs wrap that up to we have 3 VPs, frontline managers under those, and the teams under those. We wrap that up into the VP level that they wrap in their teams, which then rolls up to the company level with 3 individual meetings with the VPs on Mondays. That is our drumbeat. That is the consistency of every single week. Again, what we talk about in each of those meetings, though, it varies from week to week depending on what the week for the goal is. Slip deal reviews, for example, happens at the beginning of the quarter and mid-quarter. That's not necessarily, doesn't have to happen every single week. We want to focus that on particular points in time to drive the actual results and drive the action from it. That is our goal, is every single thing that we're doing in these meetings should result in an action, not just result in a call. We're trying to change the behavior of the company to achieve what we want to achieve as a business.
Which, to the point we made at the top of this thing, only measure we can make a decision around. To John's point, you only want to look at data that's driving actions. Just looking at data for data's sake of like, hey, looking at the number of leads that happens when it's sunny here in Colorado and John's cooking 12 chickens on his Traeger. Like, why are we looking at that, right?
Yeah. So for us, this is what it looks like in our platform. As just the example is every single week on the left-hand side here, those widgets change based on that operating cadence. Each one of these things is underpinned by a specific set of data that we are putting in place to try to drive change. And so when our reps log in and our managers log in, that's different every week. And they can just go one-stop shop, boom, 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 boom. Have I done all these things that I'm being asked to? If yes, let's go talk about them. Let's go action them. And then I can get on with my day and do all the other things to support those efforts and those deals. But we try to really simplify this as much as possible to make sure that people don't have to be going and looking for dashboard version 5 or whatever that may be, that it gets lost. You've got to make it simple for people to access the information they need to do their job. Reps will not pivot between 15 different tools. They just won't. Field teams will not. How do we put this all in place? And so that's what really has driven our, like, how do we make this consistent? And again, like I mentioned, that number one, it has to be supported by leadership, and that has to be how leadership runs their meetings, because that cascades down. Are we aligned on the common language, the actions, the definitions? Let's not argue about the data. Let's argue about what we need to go do. And so that is our goal as RevOps, is to make sure that people trust the data that we present to them. That is our goal. And how do we, that single source of truth, everyone needs to be a part of this. This cannot just be particular teams. This needs to be across the entire company. This is a full company effort, not just a sales effort, not just a CS effort. Everyone needs to be aligned on that. And our goal was to reduce those number of meetings down. We don't need a top of funnel meeting and an account review meeting and a health meeting. We just do that all in one meeting, and we're shifting that focus to make sure that people are engaged, and we're trying to make the most use of their time to give them time to actually do their side jobs, not spend 5 hours a week in reporting sessions. So this is a bit, more than happy to talk about any of this, but these are guiding principles of how we are driving that business as a company.
So we've talked about strategy. We've talked about process, in particular, the revenue cadence. We're going to get into the data architecture next. Bill, you came off mute. Did you want to ask a question?
I was just going to say, I really like the idea of the rotating theme for a singular meeting, as opposed to having a top of funnel meeting and an MQR review meeting and a MQL review meeting and a pipeline review meeting and this, that, and the other thing. Even though I see you have a number of meetings that do happen, or a number of themes that do happen every week. I guess one of my questions is, it already seems complicated for a 50-person company. And how do you streamline this? How do you think about all of these things, but at maybe a slightly higher level for a company that is still at the very early stages? For example, a lot of the stuff that you're showing, when I worked for a 2,000-person company, this is how you do it, right? But now I'm at a 50-person company where we have 6 sales reps and 1 marketing person. So we have to simplify this and maybe use it just for our Monday cadence meetings or something like that. I'm wondering if you had any advice to that end.
Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, so absolutely. And yeah, I should have prefaced that. Apologies. This is the blown out version. Honestly, I think it comes down to what are we trying to change? Like, what are the behavior that we are trying to change? The 1, 2, 3 things to start out, just focus there and interdisperse those out. And I like to describe this, and this is why what we are building as a platform. I swear I'm not trying to be an advocate, just talk about the platform sense. I just have had a hand in it, which is why I'm uber passionate about it, is how do you build this is all a foundational operating structure. If you build that foundational operating structure, then I look at it as like the trunk of a tree. Then as something else comes up, you could hang that ornament on the tree and hang that ornament on the tree, but you're operating in the same manner. That's what I think is the most important to get in the ground first, is just focus on a couple things, but build the rhythm, build the reporting, where they go for information. And then you can continuously add to it, subtract from it, adjust it. But that's the more important thing to implement, is the rhythm. Then you can grow into the complexities as you grow. But once you establish that, with our reps now, if they see another tab on there, there's a rationale behind it. There's a description behind it. And that should become second nature to actually, I just need to go here. And then there may be only 1 widget on that tab. It could be that simple. Simplicity is good. Everything doesn't need 18,000 ways to Sunday decomposed. Everything that we put in front of our field is, here's what you're seeing. I need you to take this action because of this. This isn't information for information's sake. This is information that we are asking you to do something. So build the foundation, and then you can start adjusting and adding over time. So the process is so important, and then it structures everything.
Yeah, to John's point there, Bill, make sure when that RevOps person comes in, everybody, not just you and the RevOps person, but everybody's aligned to what are you driving at this year, right? What are you driving at? Mm-hmm. And then document all the meetings you have. It is a wild exercise when you do this. We ask all our customers to do it. You'll see there's a lot of extra BS on there. and then streamline the shit out of it of like, hey, let's streamline it based on exactly what John's saying. What are the behaviors we're trying to drive that drives to the ultimate annual goal? All right.
Great.
We're going to talk about data architecture. So strategy, process, right? Particularly in the revenue cadence. Pro tip here, if you haven't done a operating cadence audit, do it. It's going to have a massive impact on your organization. So we're going to talk about a couple of things inside of the data architecture. We're not going to talk about it comprehensively. What's funny is like we're trying to find a couple of good slides that kind of shows like all the different places where data comes from. And we ended up kind of coming across it like, this has been the traditional model for the longest time of like, hey, look, this is where data is coming from, and it flows in very kind of a linear fashion, right? But there may or may not be this source of truth, and finance is pulling from their data, and QuickBooks or ERP or things like that, and sales pulling from the CRM and so on and so forth. But data structures, particularly as we're thinking about AI and more complex data sets, are starting to come from more sources, right? So John, you want to walk us through kind of like what is the new data architecture starting to look like these days?
And we have always thought, I think in the revenue operations space is probably these middle buckets. And honestly, sometimes even really just that marketing and sales bucket, like those are all these source data. And this is just all examples on here. These are the source data of how we're going to run our field teams. And I think the biggest shift that is happening is revenue data exists everywhere. It exists all across your FP&A systems, especially if you're in a consumption-based business. That is the heartbeat of the business. If that is fully disparate from how the field is operating, we got a problem. All of your root product data is so critical to understanding customer health, and on like target addressable market at the end of the day, all flows from that. Revenue data is coming from across the ecosystem of the company in a level that is shifting dramatically, and AI is just pouring fuel onto that fire. So the ability to take in from all of these different sources and actually develop the comprehensive view of the customer from prospect all the way through customer, that is what's going to separate companies who actually grow and scale efficiently versus companies who keep reinforcing these silos that have been present for decades. And getting the right talent in place to manage that is critical. We cannot have reps going into all these different systems. We can't have our field teams, our marketing teams going in across all this and saying, I'm seeing all these 18 insights from all these different places. I think this is what I need to be. We actually need to manage that at a data level and identify the critical data components and bring it together, in my opinion, at the database layer to tell that comprehensive story so we can put a single view in front of our field teams so they can take action when necessary. Because if we're expecting a rep to pivot to one solution over there and just happen to catch it, it's never going to happen. We've got to become more advanced as an industry to prep that data to power both the AI solution aspect of it as well as just our operating rhythm of the field.
To John's point here, a couple of kind of additional comments. One, you need to kind of take into account like where you're at as an organization, right? If you're a smaller organization, you may not have a data warehouse and a BI tool that can kind of layer across this, right? So what is your crawl, walk, run version of that? Where like, again, to John's point, simplicity drives execution. Where are the reps going? What's the one or two places they go that they know that data? Is that data then aligned with what FP&A is looking at, what product's looking at, right? Now, a much larger organization like Clari has the ability to layer in a database and Power BI tool on it. So like then once you get there, how is all the different inputs aligning into that data lake so that you can have this kind of single source of truth?
And I'm actually to push back a little bit. Is half of the problems that I have dealt with in my career in RevOps are because organizations in their earlier stages have bought all of these disparate tools, quite frankly, in silos without a strategy. And so even if you don't have like a dedicated data person on your RevOps team, every time you think about purchasing a tool, a data set, or whatever, make sure that you are asking the question of how is this integrating into my broader ecosystem? Can this tool even do that? To point one, and then how am I going to do that? If you go in with that intention, it is going to shift your evolution as a company and your scalability as a company. And I think putting that front and center up front, if you're just buying a tool to plug a need, it's going to end in disaster, because at some point that need is going to shift. And does that tool shift with you, or does it not? Everything has to be thought about in, will this scale and how will this scale together?
I love that. 2 pro tips for everybody. If you don't have a business systems council, set one up. And a business systems council is essentially all the key admins across all of these tools right here who build a cohesive roadmap together. And the second tip is, like, as a part of that, they should have a list of all the tech that you have, who's using it, when the renewal date, all that type of stuff, because you can be strategic about what's in your tech stack. Adam, I think you raised your hand and you had a question.
Yeah, I had a quick question. I know with the the whole shift with AI, there's a lot of fast moving parts and changes. Are there any tools that you've previously used that you don't see as necessary anymore with the shift to AI?
It's a really good question. We're going to get in an AI conversation. Without kind of like stealing the thunder, I think the interesting part about AI is there's not a silver bullet when it comes to AI. What we're seeing the most successful AI applications these days are use cases, meaning we're using AI for this thing here, right? I think some of that can replace some of these other tools. I think my general, and John, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I think my general, and this kind of a ethos at Domestique, is like, do more with less tech, meaning use the tech you have better and more consistently. If you're using all the tech you have less tech, but you're using it at like an 80% rating, I think that's better. John, agree, disagree? What would you say?
I agree. Like, added one, I don't want any vendor to come for me. Like, there's really not a tool, because every tool at some point is getting you a piece of data that tool is specialized around.
Yep.
Whether that is an input piece of data or whether that's an output piece of data. So AI is not going to necessarily solve that. It's about how you knit it all together. The one area I would say that I think is evolving pretty dramatically is around some of those data providers, those content providers, those enrichment providers. That space is changing dramatically. And I think we're all going to see shifts in who we're buying what, when, and why from in that particular space, because there's a lot of disruption happening there. So that's the one area that I personally, in my tech stack, I'm leaning on different vendors in that enrichment space differently than I have in the past. And AI is playing a pretty heavy role in there. I think we'll see a lot of disruption there, but that's the one thing that calls out to mind. The rest of it, though, is every tool that I buy, I want to make sure that the data that tool is either facilitating or is an output of that tool, I can bring that together into the broader story. If I can't do that, I'm not buying the tool. Full stop, without question. I have to be able to do that, because that's how I'm thinking about my broader journey is that data providing me core linkages on my customer journey that then I can supercharge with AI. If I can't do that, it's not worth it.
Love that. Bill, you got another question?
I think John just said what I was going to say, which is I think the missing piece for all of this is a way to bring all the data together and get insights out of it. And guess what? AI is going to be the thing that does that. It doesn't really do it yet, because a lot of these tools aren't very good at sending data out of themselves. They want to be the panel of glass that you look at. And so they're all want to pull data into themselves. Most of the AI implementations that I've seen in a lot of these tools, like in HubSpot, are kind of useless. Now, summarize my notes. Okay, great. I could also do that with ChatGPT. That's not a big deal. But we've played around with even just piping stuff from Fathom, which is a video recording system, HubSpot, and some product tools that we use into ChatGPT and seeing what insights we can get. The problem is that you need a developer to do that right now. Eventually, you're going to be able to use things probably like Zapier and some of these other tools to just shoot that all into your enterprise ChatGPT account, ask it a question, and get a table, right? And I think that's, for me, the holy grail of tying all of these things together.
Yeah, and we can get into it here. There's some kind of like low code, easy ways to do that. So we have a lot of customers using like Make, and being able to kind of like, I had one the other day that they're calling out Google News alerts for key terms. They then take those news alerts, drop it into ChatGPT to essentially kind of enrich it with a bunch of data. They then take that. They went into HubSpot. They went into ChatGPT. They then enrich it into HubSpot, and then they notify it via Slack. So there's a bunch of different ways to do that. But across the whole customer journey, there's not that holy grail yet. And how we started this conversation, the foundation that a lot of the data that a lot of this AI is based on is not great. So we're going to quickly chat about that. Let's move super quickly through that. And then I want to make sure that we spend time on this AI conversation because it's clearly like a good place. So a couple of things. We're just going to talk about like your data infrastructure. If you're going to layer AI on it, like you got to have the infrastructure correct. So these are examples of things you can go and do. All these slides will be available. If you haven't defined your lifecycle stages, and again, the standardized customer journey, like you need to go do it. I promise you, like you're going to struggle understanding marketing to sales conversion, sales to CS conversion, all that type of stuff, clear exit criteria, all that type of stuff. This is an example of what defining it looks like. You can spend more time on it. I'm intentionally moving quick. John, anything you want to add to life cycle stages?
No, just it's important. It's very important.
Stage advancement criteria is essentially the same thing, but just in the sales funnel. And again, having clear understanding of what are your exit criteria is this, like if you do life cycle stages, stage advancement criteria, well, I guarantee you, we'll promise you, you will have higher conversion through your whole revenue funnel, and you will do it at a higher ASP. Hard stop. So if you haven't done it, strong recommendation, do it. The last thing that we're going to kind of fly through is your customer journey / engagement mapping. Most people don't do this because they think this is like this 3-day exercise. You can do this in 2 hours, and you can get a 70-80% version that is good enough. Think about your segmentation. What are the key points along the way? How do you automate it? As we think about AI use cases, particularly in some of this automation in the more SMB mid-market space, this is where some of it is working well. But this will then drive, as you think about NRR, more time to value, higher renewal rates, more expansion rates, all that type of stuff. This is a great opportunity. If you get these things done well, right, and this is not comprehensive, you get these things done well, layer in on AI tools to essentially say, hey, look, summarize, all of our MQLs, where does it come from? Where should I make more investments? Your AI tool is going to be a lot smarter because you have the input data going into it that is a lot smarter. John, what else would you add to it? And I'm intentionally flying to the AI side.
I would like just to reiterate too, is if you define these and actually have your KPIs associated with each of these funnel stages, that is your first warning signal or pop the champagne signal a lot of times of, you only know if you are being successful or not successful if you have this defined and you can identify the risk signals to actually pivot when necessary. That's why this is so important, is because that gives you the basis to flex the business, which is going to inevitably happen as you start seeing things. If you're waiting for your intuition to tell you something's wrong, you're probably about 6 months to a year too late. When that's happened, this gives you the early warning signals so you can get ahead of it quickly.
Could not agree with you more. All right, the conversation that we're asking a bunch of questions around, right? And I think this is a great way to say this. John, you want to walk us through? This is another output of that Clari Labs report.
Yep. So we'll send this out to everyone afterwards. But we went and I asked all these senior leaders, and these were the top 4 areas where individuals were saying AI is like, this is where you want to focus on AI. How do we understand what we should do next? How do we understand, is a deal healthy or not? Can we actually do this in real time on the call and actually give them that real time feedback so we can be more efficient? And then how do we do better from an outbound email generation? Like that is always, like the outbounding motion right now is getting a lot of structure. Thinking back to Gartner of last week, one of those calls from Dan Gottlieb in that initial session to the chief sales officers and leaders was, do not just do AI because it sounds cool or you think you need to meet the moment. You have, and this goes back to exactly what we were just saying, map out your processes and intentionally carve out, this AI solution is going to do this in this process. We can reduce the burden. Again, this is not just AI for AI's sake. I think one of the biggest things to keep in mind is we ask our field teams to do so much. And honestly, over the past few years, it felt more like we're just adding on. AI should be a way to come and say, we're going to take this off. We are going to free up some of your time intentionally in this area so you can go do this. That's also the carrot portion of this, is each of these things needs to be very intentional, not just because it sounds cool or you saw a demo that blew your mind. Make sure it fits into how you are trying to run the business.
Could not agree with you more. There was an interesting survey from Pavilion that came out and said the average sales rep is only spending 2 hours a day selling, right? You can give a sales rep an extra hour, right? So they're still only spending 3 hours a day selling. It's 50% more time selling. All right, so we keep talking about these AI use cases. I will hard stop tell you right now, we have a ton of data points across all our customers and a bunch of people we see. There's not a silver bullet when it comes to AI right now. Where AI is doing a good job is in key use cases. And this is not a comprehensive list. This is a couple of use cases that we have seen. And I think exactly to John's point, what are the use cases inside your organization where you've defined the processes? So if you layer AI on top of it, it's going to actually be pretty accurate and it's going to give your team time back. So John, give us like an example or two of like some of these use cases, the use cases you like to see. I know you were kind of talking about some enrichment earlier. We talked about like some on the outbound and email side. Like what are some of the other use cases you like?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my favorite AI use cases is actually one on the right, a vendor called QuadSci, and churn and retention is at the top of mind for every single client I talk to of ours. It is massive. How do we actually get ahead of that curve? Budgets are being compressed at a very, very high rate right now. Everyone is feeling that pain. How do we actually get ahead of that with better account health scoring? When I came into Clari, our account health scoring pretty high level, to be completely honest, and we knew we needed to do something more, and we started partnering with this vendor called QuadSci, who I'm a massive fan of. And what they do, sorry, the chickens are a little loud behind me. What they do is actually take a look at all the raw telemetry data of your product. Every time someone is clicking on something, where they're clicking, how long they are spending on those particular attributes, and they put that all together with your account subscription data, with your case data, all of these other data sources, and run a full program on what is the actual health of that customer based on all those different attributes. And they do that through an advanced AI model, an actual AI model. They were able to tell us with a 94% accuracy a year out in advance which of our clients were going to churn. It was shocking. That gave us time to go make a difference. And I think that is the biggest thing, is there's a specific use case that gave us time to go make an impact and change behaviors. And we've reorientated the entire company around particular goals based on that output. We drive all of those signals directly in Clari in that dashboard area I was showing you before. Everything appears there. They're a true vendor. And I think I'm hearing this more and more from particular vendors of, I don't want to be the front end. I want to integrate into what you're doing already. So they do this all in our back end, and then we expose it through where we want our reps to live. That's their goal. So it's a really cool use case. And that's, again, it's intention, it fills a need, and you can fit it into your process you're already running. Those are the types of solutions you should gravitate towards.
Yeah, I think that gets into this slide here. I know you're kind of hitting on this, John, but
I'm a broken record. I mean, like a true broken record is make this easy for your field teams and for your leadership to go to one place. Push everything on that you're working. And, I like to say RevOps teams keep the chaos at bay. They are, it is always going to be chaotic. There's no way around it. We live in a chaotic world. But RevOps teams, and one of our clients actually said, they don't just keep the chaos at bay. They need to actually package up the chaos to make it impactful. And so that's what we should be working on as a team, is to make this easy. And as those changes come, which they will do, it naturally flows into where the field is operating out of.
So I think this is a great place to stop. What we've talked about today, right? As you think about how do you build better data to make data-driven decisions around, right? So the first is like making sure you understand your strategy, your process, your tools, data, and enablement. As a part of that strategy, what are you trying to measure, right? What are the 2, 3, 4, 5 key goals? What are the KPIs, the inputs and outputs that John talked about? Second, as you think about operationalizing that process, what's your revenue cadence or your operating cadence? What are the different meetings? Less is more, and how do you kind of use the same meeting where you talk about one thing one week and a different thing another week? In that meeting, you should have the key data so that you understand where you're at. And that data may evolve, right? You may just be at a crawl version right now, but over time you get to a walk and a run, that build, grow, scale, so on and so forth. The data architecture, right? As you think about this, where's all the data flowing from? Do you have the key kind of processes and things aligned where if you layer on an AI, it's actually going to show you the right data? Do you have life cycle stages? Do you have stage advancement? Do you have your customer engagement? All right, you want to step into this AI. What are the use case or 2 or 3 that's going to give your team time back and you'll trust the data? And I think the last point that John just made very eloquently is like, how do you then integrate this and keep this simple in the organization? All right, got a couple of minutes left. What questions do people have? Happy to answer anything. And by the way, if you have any questions, you're walking the dog later on, you can always email us and we're always happy to kind of, jump on another call or answer anything via email.